I'd like to introduce our speaker tonight, John Montague. In Buffalo, we tend to want to take credit for all our native sons and sons of Buffalo. Fortunately, John was raised in St. Petersburg, Florida, so we're glad he made Buffalo his home. He studied archaeology at Oxford, studied art history in graduate school, and earned his doctorate in French medieval architecture at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. He had a 37-year teaching career throughout, and also worked as a practicing designer, artist, illustrator, and film animator. He began a film animation program at the University of Wisconsin. He established History of Design program at Buff State College. Helped start the boat building program at Buff State College, which morphed into Buffalo Maritime Center, of which John is co-founder and trustee. John has played an active role in historic preservation and urban planning, serving on the boards of the Preservation Coalition, the Landmark Society, and City Preservation Board, and he is actively involved in the redevelopment of the Buffalo waterfront. Thank you. John has published his book, Basic Perspective Drawing, which is released in the 5th edition. Yeah. Please welcome John Montague.
Well, listen, thank you for inviting me here. We are intimately connected with BlackRock, the Buffalo Maritime Center. And this is an exaggerated, corrected vision of the building that we occupy right now over in Riverside. It's the old American Diamond Tool Company, which we have now pretty much refurbished the interior of. This is our plan for upgrading the exterior. So you may not recognize it when you drive by on Arthur Street. Anyway, we have this 27,000 square foot building. We have run most of our programs out of there right now. So we have historic programs. We've got quite a large library up there. We probably have about 5,000 books, all on maritime subjects, maritime boat building and history and even to fiction and so forth. We have a number of projects going on here, big restoration projects. One of the most interesting that's in there right now is we're doing a replica of the USS Trip, which was the smallest boat in the Battle of Lake Erie, a little armed sloop about 35 feet long. That's going to be launched probably in the spring. We also, out of this site, we run programs with hand-to-hand programs. So we're teaching kids STEM principles, STEM is the new thing, science, technology, engineering, math, through boat building. So that's a huge project that we have. And that's kind of extended. We now have a mobile unit where you think food truck, we're doing that kind of thing, taking it to neighborhoods in Buffalo to teach kids with that. We work with Riverside Academy and also work with the Maritime Charter School. They have like a regular program that works with us to teaching these same principles. So all of those things are going on in that building. You should drop by sometime. We got slowed down by COVID, but we're up and running. What I want to talk to you about today is our project of building the Seneca Chief, which was the boat that DeWitt Clinton opened up the Erie Canal with in 1825. This is a little bit stretched in terms of the way it does it. It's long, but it's not that long. But it's 73 feet long, about 12 feet wide. And what I want to do is kind of go through some of the issues that have developed in building this. But first of all, let me say a few things about the Erie Canal. As we've gotten into this whole project, we've sort of realized a lot of people, they know something about the Erie Canal, and what they know is the song about the Erie Canal. That's about where it is.
We know every inch of the way we go, from Albany to Buffalo.
And people say, is there still an Erie Canal? Yes, it's still there. You mean you can actually go from Buffalo to New York City? Yes, you can. I've done it. I mean, many people do it all the time. I mean, it's this is the spirit when people are coming up the Erie Canal to get back up north, or going here, going down south and so forth. But there's quite a bit of traffic, particularly yacht traffic on the Erie Canal. But to appreciate Buffalo, you need to appreciate the Erie Canal and the position, the effects that Erie Canal had on national development. And so I just want to review some of this very quickly before we get into the issues that we had in building the boat. When the United States first became the United States, when we ended the Confederacy and so on, there were the 13 original colonies that made up the United States. They were pretty much pinned up against the Atlantic Ocean. They were Atlantic states. They were cut off from the interior of the country, or what the Euro-Americans perceived as their country, their land to the west. It was all Native American. I'm glad you read that little piece, because this is part of the issue that we're dealing with. We're trying to tell the true story of the Erie Canal, the good, the bad, and the ugly. I mean, there were winners, there were losers. There were people that did triumph, they did this and so forth, and other people that suffered. So similar to the situation in doing the history of a war, like the Second World War, you don't celebrate the Second World War, but you commemorate it. In other words, bring up, this was what happened, we remember what happened, and then all those ugly things come up just as well as the beautiful and wonderful things come up. All the heroes and so forth, but also the dark side of that. So what we're trying to do in this project is to raise consciousness about the Erie Canal. It's so important and so critical in particularly the development of our own area up here. But we're trying, I know this sounds weird in this day and age, but we're trying to tell the truth, okay, as best we can do that. So, but this was the whole idea of the Erie Canal was to connect the East Coast to the interior, to open up the interior for the Euro-American settlement. And this had been dreamed of by many Europeans who come here earlier when they ran up against the Allegheny Mountains that ran all the way down into the south and so forth, way up into Maine and so forth. There was one kind of crack in this to get through, and that was the Mohawk River. So even Champlain, when he was here in the late 17th century, was thinking, now, is there a way to get through this, to do this? So there were some early plans to build canals and canalize the Mohawk River, which is over by where Albany would eventually be and so forth. But it was finally in about 1812 or so that people began to really get serious about doing it. And the plan was to build this canal from Albany to Black Rock originally, to connect it to the Great Lakes. Once you got to the Great Lakes, once these invaders, so to speak, got to the Great Lakes, they could go all the way by water, all the way to Minnesota, 1,000 miles into the interior. So this was strategically a very critical thing. Anyway, it happened. It got built, and when there are many lessons that come from this, and many kind of implications that come from this, which are really significant, that you kind of keep in the back of your mind, and this is part of what generated our interest in doing this great effort of building the boat. For one thing, if you think about when this happened, 1825, the canal opened 1825. This was not that long before the Civil War, okay? And what happened when the canal opened, it set the pattern for how people moved from the East Coast into the West. And the people that moved, that took this corridor, were people that came from Massachusetts, Connecticut, what was going to be Maine, Vermont, and so forth, New Englanders, and people from Pennsylvania and so forth, who were essentially abolitionists. I mean, they were, in their traditions, religious traditions, they were abolitionists. They were against slavery. So that this whole area of New York State was settled with abolitionists, as was Ohio, Indiana, all the way out to Minnesota. And so abolitionists were taking up that territory. If that had not happened when it did, the Southerners, slave owners who were looking for new slave states as they were moving west and moving north, they were coming up the Mississippi River, and many of these areas like southern Indiana, might as well be Alabama. I mean, it's like in terms of the attitudes and the ideas and so forth, and certainly about slavery at that time. So just fortuitously, when the Erie Canal was built, when it filled up the northern part of the United States with abolitionists, and that really created this divide between the north against slavery and the south for slavery, and so that had huge implications 20 years later, 30 years later. Another thing that happened was, and related to the Civil War, was that the Erie Canal opened up the vast resources, material, agricultural and so forth, of the Midwest, and funneled it through New York State down to New York City. So New York City became, because of the Erie Canal, New York City became America and then the world's prominent, or most prominent, commercial center. New York City really depended on all that wealth coming right through Buffalo, getting squeezed right through here into the Erie Canal and coming out of the Hudson River. You think about it, before the Erie Canal, New York was, I won't say it was a mediocre city, but it wasn't the Big Apple. I mean, bigger apples were like Philadelphia and Boston and so forth. When you got there was some place to go. When you got to New York City, you can kind of go up to Albany, which you got hills and mountains on both sides. It wasn't like, okay, here we are, New York, But once the canal opened up, New York became the transfer point. It became the central economic and commercial point, and then sort of blossomed into what it became today. So, and that was another effect. Again, if that had not happened by the time of the Civil War, 1860s, the South would have been much stronger economically. Another factor, these are just sort of historical what-if things, is that the steamboat, which had developed, and we had a steamboat in 1817 in Buffalo, the walk on water, first steamboat on the upper lakes. So this was about the time they started digging the Erie Canal, 1817. We already had a steamboat in Buffalo. It did sink, but then they raised it again. Anyway, so they were doing it, okay? But the steamboats were not really powerful enough or strong enough or capable enough to work up the Mississippi River at that time. But within 10 years, they could do that, okay? So 1825, when the Erie Canal was built, most of the traffic, most of the commerce and so forth that went down the Mississippi went one way. It went down the Mississippi, and people they would take log rafts and they'd go down the Mississippi in New Orleans, and then they'd walk back. It'd take a month to get down there and 2 months to walk back up the river to get back up to Minnesota and wherever they came from. So it was not a viable thing. Once the steamboat came in, then suddenly there's traffic going both ways. So it was like the Erie Canal. You could go up and pick stuff up, bring it down, bring money back, bring manufactured goods and so forth. Had that happened earlier, or had the canal been built just 10 years later, there would have been competition for that. So there's this sort of specter of, again, the Civil War, that New Orleans could have been the New York City of America. And what would that mean for the Civil War? If they had all the manufacturing, they had all the economic power, they had the Industrial Revolution happening in New Orleans. So anyway, there are many other speculative things about that. But the point is, it was important that the Erie Canal was built when it was built, and it was built where it was built. Without getting sidetracked and all of that, I mean, it's really worth studying this, and some of you probably already have, about how the effects and the implications of this. But in general, New York State, and there was a lot of kind of poetry about this, how God actually wanted mankind to have this a beautiful country opened up to him, and he created this V in the mountains and so forth for you to go through and so forth and so on. That was from the Euro-Christian point of view, not obviously from the Native American point of view. That God didn't say, yeah, come on, this is designed for you, to come and conquer, and so on. But there's a lot of sort of religious support for this, as well as economic support for building this canal. But it was built in such a way that the high country, because of New York, the high country is on the south side, the low country on the north side, so the canal could be fed by the Finger Lakes and by reservoirs and so forth in the high country to keep feeding the canal, feeding the water into the canal. Anyway, there are a lot of amazing technological things that happen with this. But anyway, moving on, in Buffalo at the Maritime Center, one of the things we've been doing for literally since we started almost 30 years ago in one permutation, one form or another, as part of the Buffalo State Design Department, we have been interested in preservation and recreating kind of historical context of the city. And as you may remember, in the late 80s and the early 90s and so forth, it was kind of a mess down at the waterfront. There had been literally hundreds of plans for resuscitating it and so forth. We were very much involved in all of that process, redigging the canal, the Erie Canal, where its actual terminus was. That was something we were involved in, getting the cobblestone streets in, getting the street patterns where they were, moving the ships from sort of blocking off the entire harbor up to where they are now, the naval park and so on. There were a lot of things that kind of needed to be done to kind of get the harbor in place. And one of the things that occurred to us early on was that what the city really needed was some kind of, and what this area, what later became Canalside, really needed was something to focus on. I mean, what is this about? I mean, what is Buffalo about? What is the image of Buffalo, other than this hairy animal that didn't necessarily live here, and what is a bill after all? Even named Buffalo Bill. That's problematic on many different levels. However, especially regarding Buffalo Bill and Native American cultures. Anyway, who the hell are we anyway? And so when you look at the history of this area, it clearly is dependent on the Erie Canal. Buffalo would not be here. It would be the size of some little, New York town if it weren't for the Erie Canal. So the Erie Canal made it. So the Erie Canal is one of the key elements of Buffalo. And if you stop to look at the city seal, you may remember it has a lighthouse, it has a square rigged ship, and it has a canal boat. That's really sums it up. I mean, that's the city seal. I mean, people understood this. Then it was the shipping, it was the connection to the Great Lakes, it was the Erie Canal that connected us to the East Coast, and it was the lighthouse, which was the object of the focus around it. And then, of course, in 1900, they added sparks to the edge of the city seal when we became kind of a center of electricity and electrification and so on. So anyway, we going quite a few years back, we started to do kind of speculative drawings of how to get the inner harbor, get this thing pumped up, how to recapture its kind of essential historical essence. We did a number of plans, my colleagues and I, of what that commercial ship ought to look like. Even did a number of plans on recreating a kind of historic village, kind of in the style of, to recreate what was originally the core of the city. This is where the city actually started. Wells Fargo and other famous later companies and corporations, so it actually started right there on the wharf. So we wanted to rebuild this. And part of that concept was to build a canal boat. I mean, start out small. We can't reconstruct all these buildings, although Rocco Termini, the famous Rocco, he was very interested in this process that we were trying to do, and we talked about doing a kind of a museum, kind of woven into cafes and bars and hotels and so forth. We're still talking about that, reconstructing that whole commercial wharf area. But one of the ideas that we thought we could do, we could build a canal boat and put a canal boat in the Erie Canal instead of just having these motorboat tubs, coming up and tying up there. And here you've got the historic Erie Canal reconstructed right before your eyes, and you've got these irrelevant objects. And one of the points of this was, and this is something we've used in our propaganda and our talks and so forth, of trying to encourage this sort of thing to happen, was that this terminus, this is a naval park over the right-hand side, in our fantasy picture, but that area right where the commercial slip reaches the river, that is a sacred site. I mean, that is the place where it happened. That's where the East Coast met the Great Lakes. It isn't the St. Louis Arch. I hate to disabuse with that. The St. Louis Arch, I mean, I know they tore down 5,000 houses or whatever to build that, and so forth. And great design, nothing against Saranac and all of that. But it's not in St. Louis, it's right here. This is where that happened. And we didn't even have a sign that said, this is the terminus of the Erie Canal. So, whatever. You really see the rear end of the Little Rock hanging out over there. That's about what it amounted to. So the idea was to create some kind of an ambiance here, and at least start out with a canal boat, and then the canal boat would then get people to ask questions about it, get people into the sort of history, and sort of open up that conversation. This is, again, that idea of the commemoration. So I had done a number of drawings and paintings and research on this for a long period of time, and we're talking with people and discussing the Erie Canal, and of course we've been doing a lot of other historic boats in our program, the Lake Erie Shallops and so forth and so on. But it seemed like it was time for us to kind of deal with one of the major boat types and one of the iconic images of the Erie Canal that people could identify with. So we started doing research on this, and one of the problems with this research is that, and it's something endemic with doing history of naval architecture, traditional architecture. Unlike a building, when a building is built and it falls down, falls apart, so it usually leaves some kind of an archaeological footprint, like the remnants of a basement or some walls or something like that. When a boat is built, the boat is launched, and unless one of the workers drops one of his tools, everything goes with it. It's like a boat like Black Rock, right out here at the end of the Scajaquada Creek. This was a big shipbuilding area in Black Rock at the time of the War of 1812. I mean, dozens of enormous boats were built here. What's left of it? Nothing. Maybe some nails. But the artifact actually moves out with him. So this is a major issue. So the artifacts don't exist. Well, we found a few. We found a few in the bottom of Seneca Lake. The other thing was this was all done before photography. before photography, and in a great deal of research, historical research, even in times to reconstruct historic buildings, so photographs are critically important. You can actually do a reverse perspective. This is one of my little things I used to do. Reverse perspectives from photographs and get measured drawings out of them. If you can find a brick, if you can photograph over here, you can see one brick, you know the size of the brick, then you can measure the whole thing out. You can actually reconstruct the plans and elevations of a building, okay? Or even of a boat, if you have a photograph. No photographs. This is like 15, 20 years before the photographs came in. So you don't have those. The other thing was that in traditional boat building, and boat building of this size and wooden boat buildings, oftentimes there were no plans. And this is true of a lot of architecture in Buffalo. They were not built from drawn, measured architectural plans. You'll see someone, how big do you want this? How big do you want this boat? Well, about 30 feet. So you pace off, you put a stake in the ground, put a stake in the. That look big enough for you? Yeah. How wide do you want it? And you put stakes in the ground, and then you build the boat because you know how to build a boat. Okay. So that was, and this was an ancient. This goes all the way back to the Egyptians. Okay. They didn't use didn't use math. I mean, in the Middle Ages, even in the Middle Ages, they could use math for calculating very well because they were using Roman numerals. You ever tried to do long division with Roman numerals? You know, it takes weeks. I mean, it takes weeks. How do you do it without the zero? You know, without a placeholder of zero? I mean, how do you do math with that? So the building techniques were reduced to actually proportional systems where you could just take a measurement, or you create a pattern of measurements. Like we've got this long, we've got half of that, we've got double that, and so forth. So basically, it was all adding and subtracting. You'd have a wheel or a square or whatever that was divided and subdivided, and you would just simply put templates. You put stick up against it. We need something about that wide. So okay, we walk over there, make that, and then over there, and that's how you do it. I mean, the basic math. I mean, it's like almost no mathematics or arithmetic involved except adding and subtracting. So, the point is, people were building cube whaling ships, and ocean-going square-rig ships were built that way without that until late in the 19th century. So, when we started to look at trying to find out what kind of boats were on the canal, one of the things that happened when the canal first opened up is that people were basically throwing anything into the water that would float. You know, if you're born in Rome and you want to go to Utica or whatever, you've got a kind of rowboat, or you slap together some kind of little barge and you get out there and you start paddling, or get it pulled by your horse or whatever. I mean, just get something in the water. There were bateaux, which were the kind of traditional workhorse of the 18th, 19th century, big flat-bottomed, double-ended boat. There were skiffs and barges. There were Durham boats, which if you've been to Lockport recently, last couple of years, several years, we built a 55-foot boat for Lockport. It's in the locks. It's kind of embarrassing, but it's traveled quite a bit, but mostly up and down. You know, so it's an elevator car. Okay, I mean, but you can travel a lot. You know, we're trying to calculate how many times it goes in and out, up and down, go up, in, and down, up. Anyway, but we're going to start a movement of free the bateau, free the Durham boat. So when they finally finish the locks down at the bottom, we can go off to Rochester or to Buffalo or whatever. But that's still in the future. There were coastal and river craft. I mean, people were building boats. There's a lot of these New Englanders coming in. They're coming in from Cape Cod or someplace like that. They get on the Erie Canal and they end up in the middle of New York State. And what kind of boats do they build? They build the kind of boats they always built. Boats that were perfect for Long Island Sound or for the Atlantic or whatever. So you get all those kinds of boats. And then there were European canal boat models. There was a lot of commerce and connection between Europe and the early American states. I mean, after all, the United States were part of this whole trading system, the great cycle around the Atlantic Ocean, and there was a lot of movement back and forth. So it wasn't surprising that people who had grown up in the Netherlands or people who had grown up in England and so forth saw the canals there and used those kinds of ideas. So a lot of those ideas came to bring boat types to this area. There were a lot of questions too in the research this, like how do you take badly made models and poorly drawn images, and how do you or can you extract real information out of those? Okay, this is why people love a photograph. That's a photograph. It's like, unless it's got a distorting lens, there's stuff in there you can actually measure. But when somebody does a bad drawing, and I've become a master at this interpretation, a bad drawing of a building, for example, there's actually information in there that you can be pretty sure is correct, even though the perspective is wrong, even though it's crude, even though, you know, the proportions are wrong, the man's too big to fit in the door and that kind of stuff. You can tell, usually when it's quantitative, usually if the object has, he said, these guys got 4 windows there. He's probably right, it probably had 4 windows. That's the kind of thing that a primitive or a crude, even a child would do. They'd get the number of windows right, even though the building was totally wrong. So from looking at bad images and bad models, and these actually are not bad models, these are actually pretty close, but there are only a handful of those. But you look at something like this, what can you interpret from this is actually true? Well, in the one on the top there, look at the way the stern, the back end of this boat is done here. That tells you that's a traditional way of handling the stern in a boat. You can see the bottom sort of tucks up under, that's cool. The bow kind of coming to a bow sequence. Probably the cabin on top of it, probably not quite right. But probably the number of windows were right. Probably being pulled by, this was pulled by 2 or 3 horses, with the man on the last horse being the Hoji. This one, which was done in Staffordshire, China, is supposed to be a commemoration of the Erie Canal in America. You know, where did this guy get that idea of the cabin being like that? It's like a, you know, a special sunroom on the side of this. I don't think so. You know, but he's probably right about it. It was probably a double ender, like this, probably pointing at both ends. You know, probably the railing. That's the truth. So the exaggeration of that other piece is like, no, that didn't happen. He spent a little too much time on that drawing. But these all offer information. This is a Erie Canal packet, 1824. So this is just before the Erie Canal was completed. So, and this is a kind of a stock certificate, but that is probably pretty close. That's not a steam engine in there, that's just the stove itself. But having a ladder up the front, and again, being a double-ended boat. A lot of people think that it's harder to build a boat that's pointy on both ends. It's actually easier to build a boat pointy on both ends. That's kind of a natural way to build a boat. It's like you have the center of the boat and then you squeeze the ends together like a canoe. I mean, that's physically, that's the easier way to build a boat than to build a transom. To get that plank to come in and stand onto some kind of a vertical piece, and how do you fasten it, how do you keep it from leaking and so forth. It's much easier just to build like a canoe, build a bag out of a birch bark, canvas, or whatever, and then squeeze the ends together and then give it a shape. But here, these are just some of the hundreds and hundreds of images that we look through trying to come up with what these boats are actually like. I see this guy blowing his horn here. He's announcing the arrival, or he's announcing he's going under a bridge or whatever. The people gathered up in front, clearly women wearing big puffy sleeves and so forth. The window, probably the number of the windows, probably correct. You know, that's probably correct. The proportions are a bit off, but you know, okay. You can kind of tell that from the way this building is done. The perspective on it, he's not totally unsophisticated artist. I mean, he's got some skill. You have to judge it against that. Here's another boat, another kind of boat, what we call a line boat. And one of the things you can begin to see is, looking through this literature, is visual literature, is the different types of boats that were. They had different kinds of different purposes. This was a boat that was essentially a cargo boat, but it also carried passengers. So in the forward section up here, there was a passenger cabin. Back here, a passenger cabin, sometimes just the crew and the cooks and so forth and so on. The area in between was used for carrying material. Some other weird things. Look, this is the bridge in Rochester, so the aqueduct in Rochester. One of the problems with the Erie Canal was how do you go up and down? I mean, it wasn't just flat from Troy to or from Albany to Buffalo. It goes up and down. So how do you make a boat float over a hill? Well, you have locks. You lock it in the lock. You lift the bathtub full of water. You go up to the next level and take off, open up, and coming back the other way, you lower down into the next level. So there were a whole series of locks all through the canal to do this. But in the areas where the canal is higher than a valley, for example, in Rochester, you had to actually build a bridge that held water, an aqueduct, and you would float over that aqueduct bridge, that water bridge, to the other side. So a number of these on the canal. But these are like huge engineering problems for people who didn't know what they were doing, and nobody knew what they were doing when they started. I mean, the guy who designed the locks in Lockport, which is everybody said this is one of the great achievements of, you know, of engineering and so forth. He was a math teacher at, I suppose, Lockport High or whatever it was called at the time, Lockport Academy. I mean, but you know, he figured it out. And this brings up a very important point about the Erie Canal. You know, one of the triumphs of the Erie Canal was, or one of the great effects of the Erie Canal was the formation of this idea in America, this sort of can-do, do-it-yourself, don't need no education, I'll just go out there and figure it out, you know, attitude, which shows up today even in, you know, Home Depot, self-help. I mean, that's an American thing. And if you spend any time in Europe or know a lot of Europeans, they don't do anything. They don't ever even think about touching their plumbing. They're, you know, oh my God, no. You know, you've got to hire somebody to do that. You don't do those things. In America, it's like, I can fix my own car. God dang it. I mean, you could until they became computerized. Everybody could probably change their oil and do these things. That's a very American kind of thing. And a lot of that comes from this idea of the frontier, being on the frontier, and you've got to solve the problems. You know, there's no choice. There's nobody to back up. There's no one. You can't go to the store. You can't. You got to do it. You got to solve the problem. And so, writ large, that's a big piece of what happened. That's how that transformed kind of American mentality. And of course, they're learning an enormous amount from watching the Native Americans who, like, they're living in this world. They figured out how to do it. How do they do that? How do they, you know? How do they do that? You know, so you're learning from the new experiences you're having, and you're learning how to be that new kind of person that can exist in that world. So here's some more pictures. I just want to show you a number of these pictures of the boats. You can get a feeling of the kind of material you had to look at to try to, from all of this, to try to kind of conclude how these things work. There's a close-up of that boat, but you notice some critical things. People standing on top of the boat. That's what they did. I mean, it's hot inside. You get up and ride on top. And this whole business, low bridge, everybody down. You know, that's kind of a cliche that here's that. That's because people were sitting up on top of the boat, and when you came to a low bridge, if you didn't get down, you get wiped off. And one of the reasons the bridges were so low was that they were building right through the middle of farmlands, and the farmer was responsible. He had farm on both sides. He had to get across the canal. So he had to build the bridge. So he wasn't going to build some great arched arc there to let the biggest boat through possible. He made it just exactly the height that it was required to get it over. So it would basically wipe off anything on top of the boat that was beyond that height. I mean, these were part of these kind of compromises they had to go through. But that's true. And notice the rounded edges on that roof there. That's kind of interesting. And that's something we've kind of been looking at. Like, was that? It's almost looked like a Quonset hut, you know, the kind of this round, like, really? Well, maybe they did that. I mean, you can build the bottom of a boat that way. Why couldn't you do the top of it that way? But all of these are intriguing. And this is one of the few. This is the cut just north of Lockport. It's still there. I mean, 3 miles. So when you got the problem when they got to Lockport, they had to get. This is where they finally came up over the escarpment after going up and down, you know, across the state. They get to Lockport, and they're quite a few feet down below the height of the Niagara River. So they had to get the canal up to the height of the Niagara River. The problem was when they got up there, there's a big stone mountain, or some, they call it a mountain, a stone hill. How do you get through that? They had to cut through it. So 40 feet, you know, 40-foot trench was cut for over 3 miles from Pembroke. Anyway, it's where Timothy McVeigh is from. Anyway, but so they dig this. So it comes out at the same level of the Niagara River. Okay, and then they're free on the Niagara River until they have to go up a little bump at the end of Unity Island down here, where they put another lock. That was the only the next lock. But anyway, so that shows you get the people on top of the boat. Here's another version of that, but one picture. Oftentimes you have to be careful because sometimes someone is doing a picture based on another picture, and you don't know like which one is the real, you know. This is the opening of the Erie Canal in New York Harbor off the Battery, and how they organized something like this without cell phones is really quite amazing. I mean, there were like hundreds of ships, ocean-going ships as well as canal boats. You see rowers out there, I mean, small sloops and yachts and so forth. This is for the pouring of that Buffalo Lake Erie water into the harbor. They had two buckets. One went at the Battery, the other one down to Sandy Hook, which is where you go out into the ocean. But this again is a source for, look at the length of some of these canal boats here. And some of these are longer than the locks were. And one of the explanations of that was that some of them didn't go between locks. They just, down the road they could move, they'd get to the lock and they'd go back and go somewhere else. Go back. So but the ones that had to go the full length had to be the length of the 90-foot, under the 90-foot lock. Some other boat, this is a packet boat, sort of a classic packet boat. It has windows all the way through. This is one that carried passengers. It's called a packet boat because a packet boat was a boat that carried mail, packets of mail. So it didn't have to be a canal boat. It was sailing ships were packet boats. But they had special rules. When steam came in, a packet boat was one a boat that was on a schedule. I mean, we leave at a certain time, get it, arrive at a certain time, and so on. So it was kind of high priority, like a passenger train as opposed to a freight train. Freight trains would be delayed, didn't matter. And notice what's happening in Los Angeles now. There are no passengers on the boat that are delayed, because they have a priority. So anyway, these were boats that carry passengers. Here's a freight boat over here and a passenger boat over here. You notice this arch, this sort of compound arched roof. Again, the proportions are, some of these are like off, but they can be reconstructed. And if you've got some information, say for a literary document that says, we got on a 65-foot packet boat, and there's a picture of the boat. Okay, 65 feet long, you got one measurement. Now you can work out the rest of the measurements, and you can work out the size of the windows and so forth and so on. So there's a lot you can pull out of these things. Here's a what's called this is a packet boat over here. It even says packet on the side of it. This is a line boat, which was this pilot line on, which was actually a freight boat, combination freight boat. But two types here. Sometimes they had shutters on the windows. Some of them had this weird little kind of bow on it right here, which is kind of strange. They actually had a knife on the bow so that because when boats would pass each other, the boat coming east had to drop its line to let the boat coming west cross over the line, right? Because the horses pulling it are on the same side of the road, on the north side generally. So the boat coming from the west had to drop its line, the boat coming from the east would cross over that line. And if the boat didn't drop its line, there was this big knife on the front that would cut the line. And the reason for that wasn't just to be mean, just like screw you kind of thing. It was to keep from pulling the horses into the water. No one, what do you imagine? A team of horses like, whoa, you get sucked back in the water. Even though it was only 4 feet deep, it could still be quite a mess. This is a detail of kind of a nice painting of a full packet boat. This is just east of Rochester, Pittsburgh. So there were an enormous number of paintings and drawings and so forth that we had to kind of put together to make sense of it. This is kind of the classic boat that a lot of people think of and gets copied and recopied of what an Erie Canal boat looked like. I had this model, a friend of mine who's from childhood, his grandfather had this model of an Erie Canal boat, or we thought it was an Erie Canal boat at the time. It may have been from Pennsylvania, but that was a piece of evidence. I mean, that came from the era. And this is in the Philadelphia Museum, another boat that was a canal boat, a packet boat in Pennsylvania. It wasn't on the Erie Canal, but it was on a canal like the Erie Canal, in the same era as the Erie Canal and so forth. So a lot of information you can take from those. Even when photography did come in, there were still packet boats around. This is down in Virginia, and you kind of see some exaggerated versions of these boats. Also, we knew there were European influences in this. The Dutch had been using canal boats since the late Middle Ages, and there were other boats in Venice, for example, the boats that were not canal, well, they were canal in the canals, but they were not hauled by horses and so forth. They were rowed, poled, or pulled. But a lot of the ways in which these were configured, if you were looking at history of architecture, you'd say, well, here's something. This is kind of like what we did over here. Use it for a different purpose and so on. But there was a lot of information about it. The Dutch developed a boat called a shipbuilding, a boat that was shifted, that is poled. And of course, with the honeycombs of smaller canals, flat canals, almost no locks. I mean, the Netherlands is so flat. They developed all kinds of boats. Oftentimes they were pulled by people. I mean, it's quite amazing that once you get how heavy the boat is, you can start walking, and you see these wonderful pictures from the 1920s of Dutch women, 3 Dutch women pulling a canal boat. Like, well, this is before women's liberation. But anyway, but look at some of these. They look very much like, again, I like this one. It's like a 1760, a young Napoleon, you know, riding on. They have a post in the middle hauled by a horse. The proportions are off there, but it made Napoleon look larger. It wasn't Napoleon. And here's boats in Leiden. I mean, look at those, look like Erie Canal packet boats. So this would have been known in New York State because we had a huge Dutch population. The whole eastern end of New York State was Dutch. DeWitt Clinton actually spoke Dutch. He was bilingual in Dutch and in English. I mean, DeWitt Clinton, you know, and all the Van Buren, all those characters were many of them were from Dutch descent. And then, of course, this goes on into the 19th century as these became very fashionable ways of traveling around. Something, too, to remember about a canal boat for traveling was that a canal boat was incredibly comfortable compared to almost any other kind of way of traveling. I mean, imagine going from New York, say, just Albany, to Buffalo by wagon on a rutty road with mud and plank road and the wheels breaking and jostling around. So if you've ever ridden in a stagecoach or a wagon or whatever, I mean, it's pretty brutal. And you'd have to stop at night and kind of recover and so on, and get on and do it again. You get on a canal boat and it's like totally smooth. And it wasn't even like getting on a ship where you have the dangers of sinking, and so it's only 4 feet deep, okay? You're not gonna die by drowning on the Erie Canal unless you really, you know, you had too much to drink or something. So this is a wonderful civilized way to travel. And here's the 18th century, and this is well before the Erie Canal. This is in France. This is the 19th century, also France. You guys got a laptop there? Now, another source of information that has just recently, in the last year and a half, has come to light. None of these canal boats extant. I mean, no ruins, no wrecks or whatever available because they rotted away or they've been destroyed or they've been broken up or whatever. Until a guy, Art Cohen from the Maritime Museum at Lake Champlain, did this research with the bathysphere kind of a photography, so in Seneca Lake, which is enormously deep, it's like 600 feet deep. It's like one of the deepest lakes in America, or the world, I think. They even use it for submarine testing and so forth during World War II. Well, anyway, they took these sort of bathymetric devices, which could go down that deep. Scuba divers can't get down that deep, 400 feet and so on. And they discovered, at least at this point, 17 canal boats. Because the canal boats would be dragged to Seneca Falls and sort of down to Seneca Lake, and then towed by steamboats down to Watkins Glen, where they would hook up with another canal down there. So you see these images of canal boats being sometimes 12 canal boats, 12, 13, 14 canal boats being pulled at a time by a single steamboat. And storms can come up on those lakes just like they can anywhere else. I mean, tornadoes and all that. And so there were stories of great disasters where these ships would go down, they'd all go down and be found or eat on. So there's some great, they've got zebra mussels on them, unfortunately, but they're now doing measurements of these boats, and so we're in touch with them about like, what, you know, how wide were those ones, how thick was that tiller, that can all be measured. They're too deep to raise, but it's a tremendous new source of information. So all that, long story short, we took all of that information and then tried to categorize it. What are the types of cabins? What are the types of bow types? How were the sterns designed? What were the general, in the survey, what were the most common types of boats? And from that, how can we develop a plan? In the midst of all that research, we got a sort of a no from Erie Canal Harbor Development Corporation. No, we don't want to build it, in the harbor. We wanted to build it in the harbor, get as many people involved as possible, and part of this overall city plan of getting people to identify with the Erie Canal and explore the Erie Canal, explore the harbor. What is this transportation system and so forth that built Buffalo? It was our whole idea to do this in public. Well, we were offered by Lockport, which was working on their restoration of the Flight of 5 locks up there, to come up there and say, well, why don't you build the boat up here? So, well, okay, we did. We got a grant from them for $27,000 to do the plans, to do measure plans for the Coast Guard. We had to do all the Coast Guard stuff. Unlike the old days where you just build the boat and go use it, we now have to well, for fundraising and other things, we need to know exactly how much this is going to cost us, how much wood it's going to be, how heavy it's going to be. I mean, you need to know all of that ahead of time. That's the modern way of thinking. You can speculate pretty closely down to the nickel how much it's going to cost you to do this project. And then on the basis of that, then you do all the fundraising and so forth. In the old days, you built the boat, tried to make money from it, but sank because you made some mistake or people died, that's someone else's problem. Anyway, so this is the modern world we had to deal with. So we did the plans, and these are kind of fancy computer versions of those plans, but we were able to draw up the plans, what are called lines plans, and this is the modern way in which you do, I say modern since the 18th century, how you do a boat. You draw the lines that give the shape of the boat. So this is a half view looking on top of it, the view looking at the side of it. You put those two pieces together, you draw those two pieces full size together. So we built a 64-foot table with some repeat sections in the middle. And from that, and from putting these two things together, you can derive this, front of the boat to the back, middle of the boat, from the back of the boat to the middle of the boat. Now when you build a boat, you have to build that up full size. It's not good to have, not useful to have a plan that that's what the boat looks like. It's going to be 74 feet long, all right? So a little pencil line, 74 times that is going to be pretty wide. So all your measurements get off when you try to blow it up. You can do this on a computer. So we had the loft, what they call lofting, which in the old days you'd have a loft, a big flat floor, and you kind of lay the boat out so that you could actually cut the pieces. So this is kind of what the final version of it looked like. So we had all of that from Lockport, and then they ran out of money, and this was a couple of years ago, and so we decided to build for them, because they wanted a boat that fit in the canal, okay, that fit in the locks. So we built what was called the Durham boat, which again was kind of the 18-wheeler truck of the 18th and early 19th century. And we got a group of volunteers. This is only a part of it. We had 45 people working on this boat from Rockport and from Buffalo. We built it at our shop in Riverside. It's a 55-foot boat, which was everything built traditionally. This is some of the guys working on it. This is what's called the whiskey plank. When you put the last plank in, this is a tradition. I don't know who made it up, but it's a good one. When you put the last plank in, you put it in, and you have everybody had a round of whiskey. So there were even children involved. So we built the boat, and then we launched it rather unceremoniously by modern crane. And this is going to be the method we actually launch our new boat. We can't do it the traditional way. You build the boat on the shore sideways, and then lay it into the water. Okay, because it's so long. If you went down a ramp, one end would be floating, and the other one wouldn't, and you break the boat in two. So we did it this way. This is now in the locks at Lockport. That's kind of what it looked like. It's now aged. It now looks even more authentic because it's got some crud on it. So anyway, very quickly, I just got to make this fairly short, but we had a huge, all these things, as you know from this organization and others, you have huge political problems in trying to take on some effort like this. And we learned a lot from how this worked. But I had written an article, for the paper that my voice or another voice or whatever, saying that what Buffalo really needs, people writing that, what we really need, is a basketball team or something. And mine was, what we really need is something to shape the identity of the harbor and the inner harbor and the redevelopment of the inner city. And that is the Erie Canal. We're approaching the bicentennial of the Erie Canal in 2025. What we need to do is to build a canal boat. We need to build a packet boat, a packet boat in downtown, get as many people involved with it as possible, as many hands on it as possible, as much buy-in from everybody as possible. That's really what we need to do, and then that will have an effect of bringing people an awareness of what's going on, and hopefully encourage other towns along the Erie Canal to do it, and kind of raise the consciousness of the whole community to do this. So I wrote this article, and they didn't publish it right away. They were kind of, I don't know how many people are in line for these things anyway, when people are writing in their angry protests and their brilliant ideas and so on. But this fellow, Mark Summers, who's a reporter in the paper, came over. He said, I'm going to do a story on the Maritime Center. So he came over to our place. We went through the Maritime Center and so forth and asked us about the canal boat. And so I said, well, I've written this article about what we'd like to do here. And he said, well, I'll go back, I'll dig it out of the files and see what it is. And so he called me back and he says, here's what we need to do. He says, I think this is great. This is a great idea of what we need to do. And this is a great eye-opener for me because I've been dealing with this kind of thing in preservation for years, dealing with politicians and policies and so forth and so on. He said, this is the strategy. Once I found this out, I realized I see this in lots of other things that happen. He says, we'll publish your article. Okay, so first of all, he says, we'll publish an article on the Maritime Center with the picture pages and so forth. And one of the beauties of the decline of the Buffalo News is that there are a lot more pictures in there, big ones. You know what I mean? So we'll do something on the Maritime Center, the working with the kids, the boats you built for Hoyt Lake. We'll do kind of a picture page on that. He says then the next week, and I specified when it should be like a Tuesday or something like that, we'll publish your article, your My Vision or My Turn article, which they did. And he says, and then he says after your article comes out, he says, you get your folks, your friends, your folks, your people working on the boat, and particularly if you got one in Cheektowaga, you got one in Hamburg, or what you do, get them to write in, basically say, great idea, whoa, why don't we do this? Like all of a sudden there's a groundswell, somebody reads my article and people are writing in, and the issue is it's not how many people write in, and when one person complains about one thing, and they're in the newspaper, it's like, there must be 100 other people who think the same. This is how politicians think, and this is how, and publicity works, and so forth. So we did that, and then they arranged, the paper arranged to have another kind of like, just off-the-cuff picture page thing, like our launching the boats in Hoyt Lake, or some other thing like that, just kind of like gratuitous thing of just pictures of, beautiful boats. We've been trying to get them to do this for years, incidentally, and they finally did it. And then Mark arranged for us to meet with the editorial board, which I guess is when you're working your way up in the hierarchy of interesting subjects, this is where you get the real meat. So we went into the editorial board with our idea, we showed them the whole plans, the idea of what we're trying to do, and so forth and so on. They said, they didn't say anything to us right then, so well, thank you very much, and so forth. And then they wrote an article the following Saturday, and it says, big headline, build the boat. Now, this was after the article, so they knew which boat it was, and so and that kind of threw things basically over the top. And then gratuitously on the Sunday's color picture section or whatever, they had more pictures of what we do at the boat shop, people working, inner city kids doing stuff and so forth and so on. So there we were, and then at that point, people were always coming by the boat shop, and I hope you will as well, stop in, it's kind of like, what are you doing here? This is kind of cool, I love the smell of the wood and all that stuff. And this guy comes in and he says, I'd like to talk to you about, the problem. So I gave him the tour thing, and we got another $65 member annual, cheap. Anyway, and he says, I want to talk to you about the canal boat. He says, I'm really interested in this. So we went up to the library, sat down. Long story short, it was going to be a project that was going to be about $1 million. And he said, I can pay for the boat. He says, I will pay for it. I'll pay for the boat. And like, whoa! We had to kind of keep our cool, but we didn't. This was amazing. And and he says, I'll transfer the money to your bank account at M&T. It's the local bank account over on the old M&T bank. And then we'll talk about how we do this sort of thing. So anyway, all of a sudden we had the sugar daddy comes in and plops this on us. So we immediately turned around and called Sean Ryan, we called, all of our political connections who were in favor of it, but this was a real kick for them. Yes, okay, this is a good thing. And Erie Canal Harbor Development Corporation, which had been so resistant to the idea of our doing this, suddenly they're on board. It's like, yes, yes. In fact, not only that, we were going to build a temporary building because people were saying this is going to be so ugly having a boat being built down there. Who's going to want to see it? Who's going to want to be? No one's going to be down there in the winter. Blah blah blah. All this sort of negative stuff. So if maybe you can build a temporary building, but you need to take it down as minute you're finished. Then they turned around and they, with state money and I think Buffalo Building and Zemsky, somehow all of this came together. They spent like over $4 million on the building. I mean, something like 4.5 on the building, and the building is exquisite. It's built, it's like, I hate to say it's overbuilt because we're all about quality, all that kind of stuff, craftsmanship. It's beautiful. I mean, have any of you been in it yet? Yeah. Well, anyway, I mean, it's like, it's clear cedar. It's called clear cedar, which is like, that's boat building material. No knots in it. It's like, oh my God, this is like made out of we kept thinking, we need to sneak in here at night and build some boats out of what they're using for wallpaper. Anyway, they decided because of this, this is how it works. Once some heavy hitter sort of steps in, it's kind of like, I think I'm going to buy some Apple stock. Everybody goes in and does it. So that really got us on a roll, and then that got us the building, and where we're going to build the building, how's the building going to build. I've been doing drawings of this for a long time. This is an 1860s image of it, but that's basically where our building is. There's the commercial slip here. Children's Museum would be up there. This is the river. They still had islands in the middle of the river were emptied out. This is the prime slip here, and this was the waterfront. So that's right where the building is going to be. This is the naval park here. That's where the Little Rock is, the other boats lined up there. That's the site of this. So that was the site, in fact, that was the site that we wanted, when we were speculating, we were pleading with them about, we really need to build it, we need to build it in public, we need to be right in front of everything, we need to be as close as possible to that sacred site. That's the place where the Atlantic meets the interior of America, right there. We wanted it right there. So I submitted this, and these are the places we want. And number one, that would be good. Number two, that'd be okay over here. Or number three, over the ruins. I mean, build over the ruins and interpret the ruins underneath. That was where an old brewery was. But be in the air. So anyway, this started the whole publicity thing. This is the guy, this is Dave Rogers. He's the CEO of Life Storage, which is like a humongous company started in Buffalo. He's a great Buffalo promoter, and he says, I bring people from all over the world to Buffalo. He says, and I've shown what we have here and taken down the waterfront and so on. I mean, he's just been promoting Buffalo from childhood, I think. Anyway, so we brought him the ideas and so forth, and he's now on our board, which is great. This is a Roger Allen, who's a master boat builder. This other guy, I don't know how to do it. Anyway, so we built the long shed. We designed this way back, and I mean, I'd been working on this for a long time. So we were ready to go when Erie Canal Harbor Development Corporation took over. But then we had to go through all of the preservation board. We had to go through the building inspectors and so forth. But we got through all of those committees, and there was great support for it. The paper continued to support it. The Erie Canal Harbor Development Corporation, which is basically in charge, was a subsidiary of the Empire State Development, state agency, that is in charge of controlling the development of that area. We often complain it's Erie Canal Harbor Development Corporation, but Development Corporation was the P part. Erie Canal, like, where's that, and harbor, what harbor, and that was an issue in the past, but they were kind of coming around to this. So their house architects were Hamilton House and Lawn, which is a great firm, and they took over the plan that we developed, and this is what the early stages of what that looked like, and that's where it is today. That's where the building is now. It built on the site where that other building, earlier building, would have been, and so then then COVID hit. We built the building, got the building built in the summer of, what year was that? 2020, the longest year, 2020. Then we had the opening of the shed. It was called the Long Shed. That was their name that came up with it, which some people with the Long House. No. Anyway, the Long Shed. Yeah. That has other implications too. Anyway, so this was the building, and we had just laid the keel down. We got that much done by October of last year when we opened the building, and we're trying to do a fundraiser. This is like a great opportunity to do the fundraiser in normal times. You'd have food and drink and crowds of people, but because of COVID, everybody had to be masked. There was no drinking, there was no eating. There were only 50 people allowed in the building at a time. It's hard to rouse a crowd, when you can't get them all in the same place. There were all kinds of things against us, but we were able to give everybody a chocolate bar that had a canal boat on it, and they seemed to be happy with that. And they would go home and drink alone, I guess that's right. But the only thing we had was the keel down there. We had everybody sign the keel. So Kathy Hochul signed the keel, then just Lieutenant Governor signed the keel, and all these dignitaries signed the keel. We told them it's going to be underwater eventually, but that doesn't matter. They know they're a part of it. Then, so we, over the winter, they finished the building, this is the building last year, just after it was finished. And again, it was designed to really kind of fit the period of the piece with the idea that this is going to be the first of a number of buildings that are going to kind of recreate the ambiance, the original ambiance of the harbor, like the National Guard building does. and this is a little bit later. This is at Buffalo Harbor Ferry, which we were actually instrumental in getting started, and that was Sean, Ryan, and I, worked for a couple of years to try to pull that off, and we finally got that, and these are some of our other boats, and then of course the schooner. So building the boat, and oh my God, I'll go quickly. So building the boat, what we had to do is draw that boat up full side. So we cleaned out our attic at 90 Arthur Street, and this is that 65-foot table. We thought the boat was 65 feet long when we started, but in the full disclosure, we discovered as we're getting into this, after we had the plans on it, so it was 74. We found a document, a harbor document, that said the boat was this long. So we had to change that. So we did. We just added several bays in the middle. Fortunately, it was not critical. But this is how we did that. So we took, this is what it looks like. You take the side, top view and the side view. By putting those together and working out the geometry, you get those slices of bread, that out of that shape. And those are the slices that you make the frames out of. And this is kind of how it works. And we have this on our video down there. But so you get that line here off the plans. That becomes this line here. Then that is made into this form, and then those forms are set up on the keel over here. They're laid together. And these are done out of massive pieces now. This is just a drawing. And then the next stage is you get the shape of the boat, after you get all of those frames in, then you start to plank it. So we're at this stage right now. And we're going to be starting, we're getting more of these frames in. And the next stage will be to do the planking. And these are some of those frames. Now the frames, these are white oak. We had to search all over the bloody country for white oak, which is quite rare now. It used to be you could walk out in Buffalo, in the backyard, there'd be an oak tree about this big, Oak doesn't grow 74 feet long, but there are ways to scarf it together, which we've done here. But so that wasn't available, so we got some from northern Pennsylvania. We still have to take a trip maybe to Indiana to get some of the rest of it, but we're trying to do this authentically. Well, look at these are massive pieces, and one of the interesting things about our crews that are working on is that a lot of them have built other boats. We built small boats, canoes, kayaks, sailboats, small yachts and so forth. But almost every piece of this boat takes two people to lift. It's like, can you help me move this thing? Or, you've got to get a couple of people to do it. Also, we're putting it together with bolts. You need 2,300 bronze bolts, silicon bronze bolts to hold this whole thing together. When we saw how much those cost, which is about $12 to $15 a piece, and some of them are really long. Some of them in the bow are almost 2 feet long. One of our many talented volunteers, who was a machinist my whole life, we'll make those. So he and another machinist guy, retired. These retired people are wonderful. Really, and seriously, they bring so much knowledge to this whole project. Everybody, I've said this oftentimes, but it's absolutely true. If I had to go out and hire the people that we have working on this project, number one, I wouldn't be able to find them. Number two, I wouldn't be able to pay them. And somehow miraculously we've created this thing where they've arrived and they do this for free. And these bolts are a perfect example. We need 2,300 of these bolts. And they not only started making, they have to peen the tops over. They take a rod and then they thread the rod, and then they have to take the top of that rod and they have to peen it over to make the round and put it on a form which they've constructed to give little flanges so it doesn't turn into wood. It's a complicated process. And they have to heat it up. They've got little fours there. They heat the bolts up, and then they peen the top on. And they learned a new mass production technique while they were doing this, because they were only doing like 5 a day or whatever. And then they discovered that they use this kind of a little trip hammer kind of technique. They could do like 25 a day. So this whole thing is going on in our place over in Riverside, and they're bolting them into the forms of the frames. So this is one of the guys putting those together. Those are the bolts. He's putting the bolts together. You may wonder, people wonder, why is it orange? Well, that's red lead, which is actually it's a toxic paint, which is no longer available across the counter, over the counter. But we were able to get it through a Mystic Seaport. This is a traditional boat building technique. They had an extra barrel or two. So anyway, you tell people don't put their tongue on it. But and so this is building the stem of the boat. So these we laid it out on the floor. This is the bow of the boat. And this thing, when we finally pull it together, weighed about 750 pounds. They're putting together. So the bolts, the through bolts are running through that. we put them through with like just threaded rod to hold everything in place, and then replace them with the finished bolts. And all these people are volunteers, and we only have 2 paid staff working on the boat, which are the two boat builders. Everybody else is volunteer. So they either learn from somebody else, or they learn from each other, or we do training classes for people to get involved with it. This is trying to get it, move the thing up into position. And you can kind of see the massive character of that. This picture particularly reminds me of City Hall, these Art Deco man, crossing the man pulling a, chain or whatever, carrying a piece of lightning or something. But it's really quite dramatic and quite muscular. But we have a lot of women working on the boat, but like this 3 anyway, who are very regular working, and they're wonderful. I mean, they're actually better than most of the men who have a kind of a sloppy edge to them. And women's like, you're going to do this right. That edge needs to be, fussy. They're fussy, which is great, which is wonderful. So this is what it's going to, you'll plank it, it's going to look like that. Probably in the spring sometime, we'll start building the cabin, then it's going to be finished off, and it'll look like your bookmark. So this is kind of what it is going to look like when I actually launch the boat. And this is a painting that I did. And now this is an interesting thing, because when I did this painting, the name of the boat is Seneca Chief, and that was the name of the boat. That's what it was called. It was designed by and built by Thaddeus Joy, who was a Buffalonian. It was built by people from Black Rock. That's what all the shipbuilders were. It was built in Buffalo by Black Rock builders. But that was the name of the boat, and we got some blowback from some people, some indigenous people said, you can't call it Seneca Chief. There's no such thing as a Seneca Chief. And all of a sudden we were right in the middle of, oh my God, this is an issue. And this was like, the whole issues too about, Atlanta Braves, all this kind of stuff. And it's like, this is a real question. What do you do about this? So we went down to the museum in Salamanca, and we talked to Joe Stalmbach, who's their anthropologist and director of the museum. We got together a group of people of Haudenosaunee talking about this and about this issue and so forth. And some people, it wasn't no problem at all. So that's what you call that. This is what you Euro-Americans do. What you call stuff. That's your problem. Okay, we're not interested. Others have said, well, we wanted to resolve this. We wanted to because a big piece of what we're trying to do with this, like they said, is not celebrating the Erie Canal. It's commemorating. So what did this mean? That and this is a bigger issue. What did this mean that the whites are coming into an area and then using these names? I mean, is that exploitation or is it honorific? Is it, yay, great, this is good? Or is it not only you're taking our land, you're taking our names? So that's a problematic issue. And anyway, we finally settled this with sort of the critical leaders at the museum and so forth. In fact, that's what it was called. That's what you should probably call the boat. But the point is that this is now an issue to be discussed. I mean, and this is the point of doing historic restorations and so forth, is that you raise the issue. This is how it was. Okay, let's talk about it. So we're doing a show. We have a grant to do a show on indigenous culture, how indigenous cultures in New York State were affected by the Erie Canal. That's going to be an independent show. We're working on that with the museum in Salamanca, and the show that we have up now, which is a general one about the Erie Canal. We're going to be focusing on that. That'll be next year sometime. But we're getting some of the best scholars, from UB and from around the state that are dealing with this issue. And the basic concept now is we're going to be having, essentially, we're going to have this is what happened, this is what the Euro-Americans did, and then the parallel line to that. This is what the Haudenosaunee did. This is what the natives of New York did. These are the parallel things, and hopefully it's obvious that this happened and that happened, and people can decide from seeing basically the evidence laid out. I mean, that's the approach that we've taken, and we all kind of agreed that's the way to go in designing. So in the midst of this, this was the original painting. And this was sold at auction, Historical Society auction. The original painting was, but I was making limited edition prints, which was one of the things you do today, to do these high quality giclée prints. And right in the middle of that, so I thought, if this is going to be a controversy about the Seneca Chief, I'll just make this a generic canal boat, and I'll name it Thaddeus Joy. So in the prints that I've done of this, I took out Seneca Chief and put Thaddeus Joy, who was the designer of the boat. So, okay, you know, there it is. But that's a part, I mean, that's now a part of the meaning of the print, that this was an issue, this was an issue that got raised, this was the solution, maybe it was the wrong solution, maybe it was the right solution, whatever they did. And that's kind of the story of that, and so that is the boat that we're going to be using for, you know, when the boat is launched. We're going to take it down the canal, and we're going to basically use it as a show boat for the first 2 years. In 23, it's launched in 23, and in spring of 24, we'll work the canal, sort of showboat the canal. What we want to do is to get other people in the town. I mean, virtually every significant town in New York State is on the Erie Canal or connected to the Erie Canal. Even if you're talking about Ithaca or Watkins Glen or whatever, Hammondsport, they're connected to the Erie Canal. So we want to work that, and various canal societies, the various historical societies along the way in Middleport, and Lockport, and Albion, and parts east, and get them interested in the Erie Canal, and hopefully encourage them to build boats, some version of boat. They don't have to build one as fancy as this one. And we've already gotten people asking us, can we use the plans for your boat when you're finished? And I'm thinking, sure you can. You know how expensive it is? Anyway, you've got to find your own sugar daddy to pay for these things. Anyway, and actually I have to say, it's working. I mean, the whole process of what we thought we would do, like generating this information, has really worked. So we've done, you know, been in the Syracuse Museum, the Canal Society has been involved, and one of the things that was quite surprising, a little frightening, was that we thought we were doing our own thing here in Buffalo, and all of a sudden we realized we've been pushed to the front of the stage. It's like in Albany, say, in Buffalo they're doing this, in Buffalo they're doing this, Buffalo's got this thing going, Buffalo's got, it's like, you know, sometimes like we were just quietly trying to build our own damn canal boat, you know, and solving all of our own problems, and so suddenly on the front of the stage, it's like, I gotta sing, you know, but I guess that's ultimately what we wanted. And kind of that's where we are now, and Buffalo has become a focus of the Erie Canal and this whole bicentennial. So Erie Canal Harbor Development Corporation is actually leading in setting up the International Canal Conference in 2025, which was in Rochester at one time and so forth, but it's a big deal. I mean, people from the Netherlands and China and so forth all come to the to a particular site every 4 years or whatever it is to talk about canals in general. But what better place to have it than in Buffalo, at Canalside, in our building, you know, with our boat in 2025. And then after that, the boat will be a permanent exhibition here. It's going to be fitted out the way we think, the best we can find out, the way DeWitt Clinton had the boat fitted out, and it will still continue to work on the canal. The long sections of the canal, as you know, if any of you have biked that, I mean, the bike path runs all the way, you know, to Albany, and that's built on a tow path. So you can still pull the boats by mules or horses. This was pulled by 4 gray horses. We were told that 4 gray horses. And if we can't find 4 gray horses, they will be gray by the time. Anyway, another thing that happens that we want to have the governor on the boat at some point. And we used to say, and you know, in pitching this thing, that we want to have the governor, whoever she is, and people would, wah, 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 you know, and women, you know, like that. And now, the double entendre of that is that, yes, we have a female governor, and maybe we will hopefully still be good. She's a good friend of the projects that we're doing. She lives down by the waterfront. She used to jog by our building and so forth before she moved to Albany. So we're kind of on a roll now, and we want to enroll as many of you on this project as you can. So if you're interested in it, you can go to our website, BuffaloMaritimeCenter.org, and so we've got all kinds of things. But most of all, go down there and see it. I mean, if you haven't been, go down to Canalside, and we're open most of the time. Although you always find that people say, you guys are never open, you know. Only 6.5 days a week. But so anyway, that concludes it for me. If you have any questions, you're not too tired. Yes.
I think I see a lot of ideas coming from the galleons of the 18th century.
Yes.
Especially in the shapes of the bow.
Yeah.
And the rear curvature.
Yeah.
Where the officers were.
Yeah.
And I think that was borrowed quite a bit for the design of the packet boat.
Well, yeah, well, one of the things about naval architecture, there are some things that are actually structural in the sense the way the bow is built. For example, the bow, this is a 19th century version. They didn't really know what they were doing when they did that drawing, but with the bow kind of having this high point on it, that looks like, why would you need that on a canal? You don't need to protect yourself against large waves and so forth. But that's when you're planking the boat and the lines go around the curve, and they're slanting out like this, when you bend them, they go up. So there's a kind of a natural curvature to that. So there are a lot of elements of this. It's like, this is why canoes look how they do it. This is because of basically structural things. The other part is that traditions are very strong. I mean, people, when you're not drawing plans and having those as discrete instructions of how to build a boat, you're building the boat the way you used to build a boat, or your father built the boat, or somebody else built it. You know, you are a piece of that tradition, and you're very reluctant to screw around with that, because it's a lot of work, and if you know, experimentation takes a lot of liberty with finances and other things. So this is how you do it, and of course, you got your father saying, this is the way you do it. So there's a strong tradition, and same in house building and house construction. So once people kind of got into the wave of doing like empire-style houses or neo-Gothic or whatever, well, this is how you do it. And so these are the pattern books and so on. But it's an interesting project, and it's very interesting for us to actually be doing. We use a lot of hand tools on this, but a lot of also as we're cutting something with the saw, we're thinking like, you know, someone was in a saw pit pulling down the saw. The other guy's, I mean, you've seen those horrible pictures, but one guy like covered with sawdust, he's down in the hole, and the guy, I don't know which was the hardest, lifting the saw up or pulling the saw down, but the amount of human physical labor in all of these endeavors is really quite instructive. And one of the slides I often show when I do the sort of thing on the lecture on the Erie Canal is I have a picture of a dense forest and a sign over on the side: dig a trench 4 feet deep, 40 feet wide for 360 miles. Start here. And that really is like, okay, what do you have to do first? You got to cut the damn trees down. You know, you got to pull up the roots. You got to, you know, and you know what it's like if you've ever in your garden you hit a root. It's like, oh my God, you know, it's like, you know, or a single stone that stops your shovel, and go for 360 miles. Let alone the genius of being able to survey this without lasers or without any kind of technological thing, and having to do all your math on the, you know, on a card or whatever, and lay a straight line. I mean, do a straight level line, as level as you can make it, 365 miles, starting on this hillside or whatever. I mean, it's mind-boggling that people did it, and that kind of energy that went into this, and the politics of it alone were just like excruciating. You think politics are bad today? Well, they are bad today. But it was almost as bad in the 1820s. I mean, the political party, they were fighting in the streets. They were like, you know, people hated each other, and the nation was so young, nobody kind of knew how to do democracy without beating up the other guy. You know, it's like it took a little while to say, oh, we could sort of saunter into the voting booth and out again, and everything will be fine. So it was really tough. And even when the canal was done, this was a pretty physical. It was like the Wild West. It was the first stage of the Wild West. For example, when the canal boats would get to a lock, because they're all stacked up, because it's so everybody's in the canal and everybody's in a hurry. Everybody wants to be the next one on the lock. They would actually hire professional pugilists as part of their crew. They'd have their guy who would say, "It's our turn." "No, it's our turn." "Okay." So, and they'd get up, and then everybody would gather on, you know, and the guy who wins it, so your boat goes through. I mean, that was just kind of how you settled problems. It has something to do with illiteracy, I think, but they can't write, you know, articles against each other. But anyway, so it was a fascinating period. But yeah.
So 40 foot wide?
40 feet wide, yeah.
And 4 feet deep. Is that enough water?
No, it was to start with, but there were so many boats, and the other thing, you had to keep the levels up. So this is why the genius of this. I mean, you think about the engineering of this, the hydrology of this. They had, there's a little lake that a family was originally from around Syracuse, south of Syracuse, and there's DeWitt Reservoir up there, which friends of ours had cabins on and so forth. It didn't occur to me, as a kid, of course, it was just a place to swim, but that was like a good 30 miles from the Erie Canal, but it was a reservoir that was built to feed the canal.
Oh,
Because when the canal got low in a place, you had to keep water, and so they had people running around like, we've got to turn this on, turn that on, to keep the water up. Because if the boat bottoms out, suddenly you've got, the situation they had in the Suez Canal. It's like, the situation that's in Los Angeles right now. I mean, where all of a sudden everything stops, boats, and then the fights really begin. So they had to keep water in the canal, and they also had to measure too if there's a storm or there's a flood in the canal. The flood goes over the side, then it tears the canal out, and then you get an outage there. And there was also silting in the canal. I mean, they had innumerable problems. It wasn't just getting the thing built; it was maintaining it, which was a huge problem. Even groundhogs, if they dig in a hole, it's a great place to dig a hole, and suddenly, it goes flying across the field as he opens a hole in the side of the canal, and it drains out into some farmer's field. So there were huge problems with that. But again, they developed methods of doing that. They developed Portland cement on the Erie Canal. That was one of the inventions, to be able to cement that would harden underwater. And they did this. They needed that for building the locks. It was important. The locks themselves, the basic design of the locks was an invention of Leonardo da Vinci. And he's the one that came up with that idea of just having the two gates come together with the water pressure on this side, which will hold them together watertight. And then when you let the water out, you can open the gates up here. Brilliant, but about 1490. But that was the basic one. But holding the water in the locks was really a really tough thing. But there were all kinds of inventions and remarkable kind of discoveries that went with the Erie Canal, just like in the space program. Like they invented one of the ballpoint pen that would write upside down on something. And, who knew the space program was going to create that? I mean, as well as digital calculators and so forth. The Erie Canal produced just a wealth of those things. One of the most obvious one was the Pullman car. George Pullman lived in Albion, New York, just down here. As a kid, he grew up watching the Erie Canal. By that time, the railroads were sort of taking over passenger traffic in the 1840s or 50s. He said, you could take a canal boat and set it on a set of railroad wheels and have the same thing you had in the canal boat, the fold-down beds and so forth. You could get on the canal in Schenectady, and in the morning, you could be in Syracuse, having a nice sleep on the canal, instead of jostling and staying in an inn and so forth. And he invented the Pullman, which became a huge industry in itself. And one of the best ones, though, is that when they opened the canal, they shot a cannon off. They had the cannons all lined up down the canal, all the way down to New York City, right down the Hudson. And they shot a cannon off within earshot of the next cannon. So they shot it off in Buffalo on sort of like 9 o'clock in the morning on October 26, 1825. Black Rock, they hear the cannon go off, or maybe somewhere in here, hear the cannon go off, they light their cannon off, they go, and right down to Lockport, all the way down to New York City. And there's this wonderful, there's a guy sitting on the pier down in New York City, here's a boom, 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 and here it comes, they started this, they figured this took about maybe an hour for that sequence, because not everybody was right on the plane. And so the cannon goes off. Yes, is that you could send messages with this. Is that Samuel F.B. Morse? He meant some Morse code.
Wow.
And this is before the telegraph was invented. Okay, so it's like there's a way. This Erie Canal, there's a way to send messages like this. You could have like 2 cannon shots will mean Y, or 3 cannon shots, And so he works this whole thing out and is ready for that next technological development, which is the telegraph. But there's like one thing after another as you dig into this and you realize what was happening and how those ideas, how the attitude affected the kind of new things that emerged. And it's quite remarkable. And there's a great, some of your historians know that the Turner thesis of the American frontier was written in the 90s, 1890s. When the frontier closed, when all the land had been basically, there was no more like homesteading on empty land, or not empty land, native land, all right? There was no more way to expand. Then the frontier closed. It was closed, and then people bounced off the frontier. They had spent their whole several generations moving like this, and suddenly they stopped, and they started bouncing back east. People who live in Illinois would move back to abandoned farms in New York, and so there's a huge transformation of American culture when that happened. But the idea was still planted in there that if you don't like what's going on, you can always go over the next hill. You can have your, you're getting too crowded here. I'm going to move west. I'm going to do crowded here. I'm going to move west. Daniel Boone had some famous statement. Someone had moved in like about 10 miles away from him, a cabin 10 miles. He says, "It's getting crowded. I got to move out." Okay, but that's in the human being. This is what happens when people leave the city for the suburbs. Then that suburb's not good enough. I know there's another suburb out there. Hamburg isn't good enough. I'm going further south. I'm going further east. East Amherst isn't far enough away. So, I'm going to go, until we find some place that's really far away. And that's an American problem. And so people bounce off the suburbs, and now coming back to centralized European concept of the city, I think. And yeah.
Well, hearing all this, what really impressed me was, the problem solving that you folks did, and solving the political problem, and getting the publicity to get where you are now. And a few years ago, Buffalo Spree asked me to do an update on what was happening with the SS Columbia, which is the boat, steamboat, whatever you call it.
A sister ship of the Canadiana.
Of the Canadiana, exactly. That's more to the side of the city. And, I was reading about all the problems with that and the things that they were going to have to go through to get that done and to get that boat. So I'm listening to you and I'm thinking, maybe they should put some of you folks from the Maritime Center on their board.
Well,
to help them get that done.
I have to tell you about the Columbia. You all know the Canadiana, right? That's one of Buffalo's famous ships. They were both designed. The Canadiana and Americana were both built in Buffalo in about the same time. I think a little bit later, like 1912 or whatever. The Columbia was built in Michigan, and it did something similar to what the Canadiana did, which was to take people to an amusement park on an island and so forth, like we would go to Erie. So what happened to that boat is a group of New York investors wanted to use it to revive the kind of the day line in New York City, have restaurants and so on, take people up to Albany overnight and so on. So they brought the boat to Buffalo with great fanfare. They had restored the bottom of the boat, so it's basically a floating boat. The upstairs is just a wreck. They brought it to Buffalo, and then they found that they could not get it down the St. Lawrence River according to Coast Guard rules and so forth without putting it on a barge, which is like a big industrial, set the whole boat on a barge and take it down to New York City. But they were going to refurbish it down there. So now the latest on that is that they would like to do it here. They would like to refurbish it here. And the investors on the Hudson River want this boat. They want it down there, but they're trying to get people here. Let's just leave it here. We'll have our Canadiana back or whatever. But a footnote to that is that we at the Maritime Center are what they call ship's keeper for that. So we check it every Friday for leaks. One of our guys goes down there like, the flashlight is a leak. No, nothing happened. I guess we're okay. But the problem with that boat, or the possibility of that boat, the hull is in great shape because they redid the hull. That's fine. But the upper structure, which is all wood, is essentially just carpentry. I mean, it's not like nothing particularly marine about it. I mean, the paneling and all of that kind of stuff. So it's very restorable. And the engines are still in good shape, the steam engines, but it could be transferred out from diesel engines and a lot of possibilities, but granted, it takes some vision and dedication and finding a purpose for it and an image for it. And we were lucky with the canal that it made that appeal, and it wasn't always, you know, we've been blocked at sort of every level by somebody. I mean, there's always somebody who blocks it. I mean, oh, that's an awful idea, we ought to be spending more money on the bills or something, you know. We ought to spend $1 billion so or on the stadium, you know, sort of doing these kind of things. I mean, there's always those other forces you're dealing with, but anyway, so far we're okay on this. I mean, this is working out, but a lot of people, you know, with so many of these things and preservation issues and so forth, it'll never happen, you know, nobody's going to want that. When I first moved to Buffalo in 1984, and I was new to Buffalo, I was just, I mean, I couldn't believe how excited about Buffalo all the new people were in Buffalo, and how discouraged all the old people were. Oh, Buffalo, what the hell, oh my God. They had these things like trying to get thinking proud, you know, and it was like, it was awful. And I was like, no, you guys don't realize how great this place is. I was an architectural historian as I arrived, and that was my recent career. And oh my God, this city is rich. And I was pleading with the Visitors Bureau and so forth, like, Buffalo needs to characterize itself as America's Victorian city. I mean, they need a tagline like that, like, you know, Charleston, South Carolina, playing, you know, the old South. You know, you're into the old South, and not so many people are anymore. But if you're into the old South, Charleston is what it's all about. You can do all that kind of stuff, and they've got all the imagery for that. We've got the imagery in Buffalo from America from 1850 to 1930. It's here. I mean, topping it all off with City Hall from crying out loud. That's one of the greatest Art Deco buildings of all time, as well as Frank Lloyd Wright and all the famous architects, but the domestic architecture here. I mean, you know, Black Rock and Riverside, let alone, you know, the big stuff on Richmond and Lincoln Parkway and so on. I mean, it's all here. But you know, to hear people, you know I missed a lot of the tree cutting down and, you know, a lot of the rust flying around by the time we got here in '84. But you know, it's come back, and it's a gold mine, and it's getting even better now. I mean, we're getting visit. We've had over 20-some thousand people visit our little site down there in the harbor. And so many of them are from out of town. We had one of the first questions we asked our visitors, where are you from? Colorado or Los Angeles. Like, what are you doing here? You know, and they oftentimes will say, well, you know, we came to see Niagara Falls and we discovered this. And this is something that the Visitors Bureau has been trying to do for years. Like all those thousands of people going to Niagara Falls, you know, get into Stop and Buffalo. How do you get into Stop and Buffalo? And you need things like this. You need a feature. You need, as superficial as it may be, you know, say, let's go see the old canal boat or whatever. That gets them down there. Let's go see the merry-go-round or whatever. Let's see the carousel or whatever. That's what once you get them here, we'll go see a Frank Lloyd Wright building. Once you get them here, then they look around and say, oh my God, look, there's other stuff here. I mean, it's just it's incredible, the enthusiasm. But is there any other questions?
Okay, but what was the average weight of one of these boats?
The average weight, well, we theoretically know precisely what the weight is in our design, because we had to calculate the weight of all of the wood, the weight of the mast, and, you know, all the stuff. It's going to be about, what did I say, about 20 tons. This is 20 tons, pulled by 3 horses. And what's remarkable about this is that the whole genius of the canal boat is that you're using water as a slippery surface on which to drag something, right? So, I mean, even a big yacht, you can stand on the shore and you can kind of push the boat out. Just take your time, you can push it out, and, you know, moving tons. You know, like one little person can do that. That's why these pictures of the women pulling canal boats in the Netherlands. Once you get the thing moving, it's got momentum and so on. But one of the remarkable things for the canal was so prosperous. Everyone thought this is going to fail, it's going to cost us thousands, we're going to be in debt, what would cost $100 to ship from Buffalo to New York City was reduced down to $10. So it was a ton of something or other, it would cost you $100, it's now only cost you $10. So all of a sudden, profits just went through the ceiling. And the shipment, and so that meant that all the grain that was grown in Ohio, they were already starting to grow grain, they had excess surpluses, but no market for it. And one of the reasons, and this is just a purely raw political economic reason for building the canal from Buffalo to New York City, was to keep all of those farmers in New York State and in Ohio and so forth from trading with Canada. And Canada was still the British colony, and people were already starting to like go from Rochester to flour mill and taking it to Toronto or taking to Kingston, and so just sailing across the lake, and then down to Montreal. So that was part of it, like keep it inside of our border. And they didn't want to. It would seem logical if you were going to take a waterborne trip to go from New York City, say even to Niagara on the Lake, say, called Newark at the time. It would make sense to go down the Oswego River and then go along the coast, just go along, stay in the water, and so forth, and then get down to there, and then haul your boat. This is what they did: haul the boat up over the escarpment at Lewiston, and they would drag these boats. They had wheels, and so they drag them up, crank them up, get them up with the escarpment, get them up into the Niagara River. That would seem to make sense. But this was just after less than 10 years after the Buffalo had been burned by the British. I mean, that was still an issue. Were we still going to fight? Was Britain going to come in and sweep down into New York State and take this over? So they designed there's a lot of argument about this, designed the canal to stay inside New York State, away from the coast, the Lake Ontario shoreline. And it's like, that doesn't, if you're going to do that today, like, and of course with power boats you could do this, you use the lake instead of digging it. So anyway, one of the things we thought we at the long shed down that we have things very popular with the kids, and so we have some kind of hands-on. We're all about hands-on. We have a brace, and so they can drill a hole, and there are like I don't know how many thousands of holes that have to be drilled in this boat to put those rods through. So they get to do this, and we sort of do this on a lark. Then look to see if any kid wants to do it. Well, they all want to do it, okay? No matter how big or small they want to do it, and their parents want them to do it. And they're taking a picture of their it's like, who knew? I mean, well, hand planes too. So they had hand planes, and it's like that's more fun than anything they can invent over at the Children's Museum. But one of the things I thought would be a good idea is to have something like a sandbox with some real dirt in it and a shovel, and say, dig, maybe throw some roots and rocks in there, and just, like, okay, now 365 miles, get going. You've only got a few years to do it. So. Okay, well, thanks a lot. I appreciate it.
Start us all to visit Maritime Center, Longshed at Canalside, and even the Erie Canal.
Yeah, BuffaloMaritimeCenter.org, and you can go online and you can see a lot of pictures of what we do, and they're on Facebook and Instagram and so forth, but you kind of keep up with what's going on, and you might want to become a member. I mean, like that $65 guy who came in and dropped $1 million on us. So if you have $1 million extra, you don't want to spend it on this museum.
I also want to thank Janine Barron, our fall speaker series program manager. He certainly brought the perfect person in to talk about the setting the chief and Erie Canal. And I can't wait to hear our next two speakers next coming Thursdays. Thank you, Janine. Thanks for coming.